It was 1845, and the United States were walking on thin ice. Though tensions had calmed between the northern and southern states following the Missouri Compromise, the United States were still very cautious about admitting more states into the Union, as that would not help with the teetering balance they currently had. But soon enough, another state would join the Union, Texas, and it is here where our story begins. This was the Mexican-American War. Going back, it's 1821, and Mexico had just gained its independence from Spain after a brutal decade-long war. Here is where the trouble begins. Although Mexico was very big, their population wasn't evenly distributed. Northern Mexico had a huge lack of people, which left them vulnerable to any natives who wanted their old lands back. So the government created a policy that allowed American and European immigrants to come to this territory and become Mexican citizens. And they did, with 300 American families coming in to settle in the region, specifically in the province of Tejas. By 1829, there were more non-Hispanic citizens than Hispanics in Tejas. The Mexicans tried to stop the immigration by abolishing slavery, making living there less desirable. But that didn't stop things, and soon, cultural independence began to emerge in the region. And in October of 1835, Texians began to raise their arms, beginning the Texas Revolution. The war would last a whole year, but eventually in 1836, the Texians won their independence from the Mexicans, calling themselves the Republic of Texas, only to immediately decide on joining the United States instead. Which brings us back to the start of the video in 1845, and the US were considering their next move. We can't accept Texas, it will be too much for this union. Come on, this will be a chance to expand our influence. This will be a chance to expand your influence. And you already outnumber us 14-13, there's no way we can accept this. But these American souls are suffering under foreign rule. Surely you'll understand their plight and accept their call for annexation. Alright, fine. He can join our union. So on December 29th, 1845, Texas joined the Union, becoming the 28th state of the United States. Alright, Texas, welcome to the Union. Pleasure to be here. Okay, so can you tell me where your borders end? Well, you see... De acuerdo, no aceptaré esto, pero supongo que ahora eres independiente. Sweet. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to enforce my territory north of the Rio Grande. ¿Qué? Tu territorio termina al norte del Río Nueces. Huh? Tu territorio termina al norte del Río Nueces. Rio Grande, Rio Nueces. Grand Nueces, Grand Nueces, Grand Nueces. So, safe to say, the United States had accidentally gotten themselves into a border dispute. Having annexed Texas, President Polk recognized the Texian border at the Rio Grande. For Polk, this was a golden opportunity to expand to the west coast. So in 1846, the United States signed the Oregon Treaty with Great Britain, splitting the Oregon Territory between the United States and Canada. And the United States prepared themselves for a war against the Mexicans. In April 1846, General Taylor and his men began to march south to the Rio Grande. General Taylor eventually decided to build a makeshift fort not too far away from Matamoros. Mexican artillery opened fire on Fort Texas, leading to a siege. 5 days later, on May 8th, 2,400 American soldiers came to aid the men at Fort Texas, while 3,400 Mexican soldiers came to besiege the city. However, by May 9th, the Mexicans were forced to retreat. 4 days later, the two were at war. Now, with the Americans having beaten back the Mexicans past the Rio Grande, most of the fighting moved to other parts of northern Mexico. In June, General Stephen W. Kearny and his 1,700 men moved southwest to take the territories of Alta California and Nuevo Mexico. Kearny wouldn't encounter any Mexican forces for 2 months, not even when they entered Santa Fe and claimed the territory of New Mexico. You see, the governor of Santa Fe had fled. They had set up defenses, but they retreated before anyone died. So after placing this guy in charge of defending New Mexico, Kearny moved west to Alta California. Now, the Mexicans in California wanted to take more action against the Americans. They prohibited any unnaturalized foreigners from owning any land, with a possible American expulsion. This led to the American settlers seizing a Mexican outpost in Sonoma, not too far away from the city of Yerba Buena, where the Americans later occupied in July. These so-called bear flags, named after the flag they waved, were later joined by Captain Fremont's men, who were in the area, becoming Fremont's California Battalion. Seeing this, Commodore John D. Sloat of the U.S. Navy's Pacific Squadron led an attack on the nearby city of Monterey on July 7th. But then command moved from Commodore Sloat to Commodore Robert F. Stockton, and this was where things turned up to 11. Stockton had two more cities in mind, San Diego and Los Angeles. Fremont took San Diego, but Los Angeles was a bit more tricky. Now, similar to New Mexico, the territory was mainly abandoned with little enforcement from the Mexican government, and on the 13th of August, the Americans entered Los Angeles with little problems, easily defeating the little resistance from the locals. It was only after they left did things become difficult. On September 23rd, the locals rose up once again under Jose Maria Flores. A siege took place outside the city, with the Americans having to retreat to Fort Hill, but by the 29th, with the lack of water, the Americans had to retreat, even retreating from San Diego and Santa Barbara. It was around this time when General Kearny finally arrived, having a commotion against General Andres Pico in the Battle of San Pascual. From there, they were able to retake the lost cities. They took San Luis Obispo on December 14th, Santa Barbara on the 27th, and on the 8th and 9th of January, 1847, the joint American force were able to beat the Mexicans at the Battle of Rio San Gabriel and the Battle of La Mesa, allowing them to retake Los Angeles and lead to the capitulation of Alta California. So by now, most of the northern Mexican territory had been completely taken over by the Americans, with some parts of Mexico proper having also been taken by the Americans. But Polk wasn't done with these Latinos just yet. With the northern territory secured, he set his sights on the capital, Mexico City. Though General Taylor was already advancing southward, Polk also sent General Winfield Scott to lead the capturing of Mexico City. And so it began. After a 12-day siege at Veracruz, the Americans moved inland. Now, the Mexicans had a plan for if the Americans were able to make it inland. Terrain. Rather, there was rough terrain on the way from the coast to Mexico City. So it'd be pretty easy to push back the Americans. Right? Well, they tried their strategy when they stationed themselves in Cerro Gordo, and the Americans arrived on the 12th, only for the Mexicans to accidentally launch artillery fire prematurely, signaling their location. So the American plan for the battle was simple, taking control of this hill around the rear end of Mexican positions. So after doing some reconnaissance missions, the Americans were able to make out a route to the hill, and on the 17th of April, the Americans took the hill, storing Mexican positions on El Telegrafo Hill the following day. The Americans continued onward, from Cerro Gordo to Puebla in May to Mexico City in September. The main assault came on September 12th, and it was a process. Now, the city was defended by Chapultepec Castle, so the Americans made quick work of that. Afterwards, they began to breach the gates. The 4th Division under John A. Quitman went for the Belen Gate, while the 1st Division under William J. Worth went for the San Cosme Gate. The Mexicans put up a heck of a fight, leading to thousands of casualties on both sides. But eventually, they broke through. Now, if you think that what would happen next would be one final climactic battle that will close out the entire war, then I guess you never saw my other videos where I said this exact same phrase. Though the Battle of Mexico City proved to be triumphant, it also proved to be anticlimactic, because when Worth and Quitman entered the city, it was undefended. The Mexican military had fled, and over the next few months, the U.S. Army would deal with the runaway Mexican army and the Mexican government in exile, with the war officially coming to an end on February 2nd, 1848. Essentially, the United States would gain all of the northern Mexican territory, with the Texan-Mexican border being on the Rio Grande. The Mexicans, by contrast, would be given $15 million in compensation for the lost territory. Fun fact, this was the same amount the Americans paid for Louisiana, but due to the growing value of the dollar, the price would be around $21 million in 1803 money, or $571 million in 2023 money. In the aftermath of the war, Mexico would end up tearing themselves apart over the whole ordeal. And in 1857, Mexico fell into civil war, allowing the French to come in and invade the country not long after. Meanwhile, the United States had all of this new territory with people beginning to settle westward. More states would be added to the Union, including Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, and Oregon, leaving the balance pretty one-sided, with 18 free states and 15 slave states. They tried to resolve it with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, allowing more states to become a free state or slave state via vote, but that only led to the 5-year chaos in Kansas, leading to its addition into the Union as a free state. This fragile balance that was established from the Missouri Compromise was smashed in a few mere years, leading to the election of an abolitionist in November of 1860 and the secession of southern states that following December. The war between the states had officially begun.